there is me. There you have my email address where you may send complaints after the lecture. Rule of law is one term I'll be coming back to several times. And I think in order to have a calm, peaceful dialogue between human beings, we also need this framework where you can do it safely. I hope no one who is here today has been afraid of coming here. No one has had to call the government on beforehand to ask, is it okay that I attend this lecture? Those who are arranging this didn't have to check this first, that you were allowed to do so. No one has checked my manuscript on beforehand. My friends, this is rule of law, which means that we have a basic security in our persons and in our own lives. Now, this is threatened, and has been threatened for a long time around the world. And the worst that we have seen has been within the last 100 years. With the totalitarian regimes in the Soviet Union, in Nazi Germany, and in China. Just to give you a little image before I start on my slides and everything, of what this is all about. I read a story not too long ago in a history book about Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union in the 1930s. He was getting rid of every single political enemy that could get in his way. And he made sure that everyone had to stand before an audience and confess their sins against Stalin and the Soviet Union before they were summarily executed. Now, one guy, in telling about his life, says that as a hobby, he's a mountain climber. He goes down to the Caucasus and he climbs mountains. And the story goes that the next day in Moscow, they arrest mountain climbers. That's a totalitarian regime with no rule of law. Because you never know. Stalin has suddenly decided that these people may be dangerous. Now, imagine you're a mountain climber. Monday it was okay, Tuesday it's not. They're coming at 3:30 in the morning, that's when they come, because that's when you are at your most tired. 2 hours later, you have a light in your face asking you, why are you an enemy of the people? 2 weeks later, you are probably in a concentration camp in Siberia. And please, remember, I'm not talking fairy tales here. And I'm not talking about something that happened as a mistake to 10 or 20 people. This was a systematic way that millions of people were arrested, tortured, and killed during the previous century. And this happened in countries deeply inspired by what we normally call Western civilization. In countries, not least like Germany, but Marxism, of course, also came from Western Europe. It can happen anywhere. But please remember that Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin or Mao Zedong of today, he will have access to modern bio and gene technology, modern communications technology, you know a bit about us in this house, and modern artificial intelligence. That way he'll win. What stands between us and that nightmare scenario? Well, that's you. That's the values that you stand for. That's what you are willing to fight for, and what you say is important. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you vote for the one party or the other, and it's great to talk about that today because there's an election here, I can assure you. You are in all the Norwegian newspapers as well, because one of the candidates is called Presley. And that's a big news story. Whichever way you vote, please remember that we have certain values that we need to protect together. Because otherwise, this could get really ugly. Well, let's start in a bit more light-hearted way. I've already spent a lot of time. I always have very long introductions, but I have really short talks, so it evens out. I have a long ending, but anyway, we'll get there. I just thought I'd share with you a picture, which I feel is of you. Has anyone here heard of the famous Norwegian expressionist painter Edvard Munch? Yes. He's the one with the scream. Yeah. So he's kind of famous. There's a picture of him, or rather a painting he made, called The Students. And I have now learned from my daughters a new transition in PowerPoint, so I'll try that one here. I'm not too technical, but we'll give it a try. Let me see. No, it didn't work. It was supposed to go. Oh, there, yeah, there. It works that way as well. Okay, let me try again. Bing. Yeah, there we go. Isn't that wonderful? From about 1912, and you have this multitude of different students that he envisages in the Norwegian mountains. Has anyone here ever been to Norway? We're kind of out of the way. Remember Paul McCartney once started a world tour in Norway, and he was asked, why Norway? And he said, well, it's off Broadway. But Norway is, as some of you will have seen in pictures, a hilly country, and here you have this. Well, I'm sorry to say I'm just telling you a lot of lies now, because I made this picture yesterday in 20 seconds. Many of you do research on this, don't you? Artificial intelligence, ChatGPT. This is a program called DALI 2. I asked for a picture of international students in the Norwegian mountains in the style of Edvard Munch and oil painting expressionist. And 20 seconds later, I had that one. And of course, it's partly to honor you that I want to show you this Munch painting that actually has to do with you, but it's also a reminder that we live at a time when technology is moving so fast, we're not really sure if we have control. And in the midst of that, our theme for today is dialogue. Dialogue not with machines, but with human beings. The mystery of dialogue. That's a nice transition too, isn't it? One of the greatest philosophers of our civilization, who's also had immense influence on Jewish and Muslim civilizations, is Plato. And Plato, of course, arranged most of his philosophical works as dialogues. Some of you here will have read at least snippets of Plato, right? Or cliff notes. You've touched on this guy who didn't write treatises, but he wrote this as conversations. And he said there is something special about the conversation, because in the conversation you have to pay attention to the other. You cannot just read the script. Some famous dialogue called the Phaedrus. For Socrates, Plato's teacher, says that oral dialogue is better than the written treatise. Because in oral dialogue you have to pay attention to the other. You have to listen. You have to memorize what did actually this person say. You have to use your consciousness in a different way. How do we know Socrates said that? Well, Plato wrote it down. That's of course the irony. We need written communication as well. But there is something about the mystery of the dialogue. There is a mystery and potential in the meeting of minds. I've had it like this morning. Starting at 7:30. I've been meeting people I've never met before. Wonderful people. For breakfast, for chat in the hall. And new mysteries open up to me. Each and every one of them have a story to tell. They're from somewhere. They have experiences. What can I learn? How can I become part of what they have experienced? And maybe I can share something of myself. And when you approach the meeting with the other person at that sort of mystery, as the great philosopher Emmanuel Levinas would say, as ultimately the meeting with the divine, the mystery of the other person, then that is the start of peace. Because if you know someone, you don't want to destroy them. If you know someone, you want to get in touch with them. And maybe you disagree, maybe you're really angry, but you don't want to make that person your enemy. Well, I wish what I just said were true. But we know, of course, that people can be led to terrible acts to other human beings that they know. We know it from Nazi Germany, we know it from Balkans, from so many places, that those who were neighbors and friends yesterday can be mortal enemies the next. I nonetheless believe that true dialogue can get us a long part of the way towards peace. And that's the ideal of university, isn't it? That's the ideal of liberal education. You open yourself up to something that's foreign to you. You open yourself up to listening to things that are different. Different religious beliefs, different cultures, different languages. All the while thinking, wow, the mystery of the other. Sometimes, of course, you will realize that the other is not open. So, of course, there are limits to this kind of dialogue. If you are in a dialogue with Joseph Goebbels, you can pretty much say, no, I don't want to listen to you, because you are ideological and you're hateful. But I would say those examples are on the fringes. And I think there's a danger today that we too easily label the other. I don't like the party you voted for, so I won't even listen to you. Reserve that for the extreme cases. And beware of labeling. Because through dialogue, if we are aware of the challenges, it can be truly successful. If we have a commitment to mutual respect and understanding, and these may come across as just banal words, cliches, And you know what respect means? It comes from Latin. Spectare means to see, and the important prefix, re, see again. Take the time. Maybe I got you wrong the first time. Maybe I should listen again. Maybe I came into this dialogue with too much prejudice. Let's respect each other. I think this needs to be grounded in this incredibly important idea of human dignity. When they gathered in 1948 to write the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the United Nations, and I'll come back to that in a second, they agreed that this word has to be in the very first line of the first article. But not only dignity, also the adjective, you've read this, inherent. Inherent dignity. Dignity inheres in the other, simply as a human being. This, of course, is the committee's answer to the Holocaust, which said, you belong, but you don't. You don't have dignity. You don't belong inside here. You are outside. The answer from the whole world community is no. Dignity is inherent. Whatever handicap or disability you have, how old you are, what you look like, even what you've done, dignity inheres in you. Therefore, I have responsibility for the way in which I treat you, look at you, think of you. And that leads to the next point. How can we actively search for common ground? I have a new friend this morning. We've only known each other for 12 minutes, but we had a great discussion about the Middle East. You come from Israel. And we know that there is much common ground to be found. I've worked quite a lot in the Middle East with Palestinian youth and with Israeli youth who really have common ground and want to find common ground. They want to live in peace. They have politicians and leaders who pull in other directions. But they want to because they see, literally we have common ground because we're in the same place. Physically. But also there are lots of things that we want together. All of us want for our children to be able to live in peace. Let us search for common ground. But in doing that, we must also be willing to listen to truth. A commitment to truth-seeking. We may see the truth differently, but at least let us try to listen to the way in which truth is seen by the other side. Sometimes truth is about the natural sciences. And then there isn't that much to quarrel about. Although there can always be a new finding, always a new theoretical advance that helps us see things better. But of course, when it comes to a question like history, you are celebrating 175 years, the history of Ole Miss. Goodness, how fascinating. I can assure you that as a student of US politics, as someone who has studied the civil rights struggle in the US, I knew about this place long before I knew Zenbe and Hannah and his family, their family. Because this is a place where history has played itself out. And different people will read that history differently. But if we try to read each other's history, listen, and see what is there in common, that can actually lead us to a better, more truthful conversation about where we are. Which leads to the next point. Sometimes I won't get everything I wanted. Sometimes I have to say, well, you know, I'll have to give in to what's one of your points. But I think that's good. Because then we can move on. Compromise is not a 4-letter word. It's actually a 10-letter word, I see now. But you know the expression. To actually say to the other party, you may have a good point. Maybe I should look at my own point of view again and see what I can do. Many of the greatest instances of peace in our world has happened that way. One of my heroes is the Irish politician John Hume, who received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work to create peace in Northern Ireland. His starting point was that as Irish, we must speak to the British and be open to them. People said to him, it's crazy, you cannot do that. There are occupiers. They destroy our country through what they do in Northern Ireland. No, we have to sit down and talk. It took him 20 years, 25 years. Gradually, they came to the point where they could create peace. Then, of course, there are some things we won't compromise. There are some cases in which we'll say, no. In the last days of the war, Henrik Himmler thought that he could create peace. with the United Kingdom and the United States, and he was terribly naive and terribly wrong, because there is no compromise with pure evil. But don't see pure evil everywhere. Most people aren't pure evil. The Irish and the British stances in Northern Ireland are not pure evil. Yes, they are against each other, and some have done evil acts. But we can do things, like two of my great heroes from the previous century, Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan. Say what you want about Reagan as a president. I'm not sure I would have voted for him, but he saw that you have to try to build bridges as possible. Because even if the other side is what we call the evil empire, you've heard that term from Star Wars, it was made popular by Reagan himself, he also said that doesn't mean that all of them are evil. We can find compromise. One of the things that fascinates me about the dialogue between someone like Gorbachev and, or Gorbachev in Russian, and Ronald Reagan, is that also they spoke well of each other. They avoided derogatory language in their meetings, and also publicly praised each other. To praise your opponent, to say that I disagree with you, but I really appreciate the fact that you are here. I saw not too long ago a speech on YouTube by Ronald Reagan, where he praised Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the House, Democrat, in the American system, what you call far left, and Reagan somewhat further to the right. But the two of them loved each other, appreciated each other, spoke well of each other. They could be fierce enemies. They could say the most terrible things about each other's policies, but always held on to the fact that let's speak well of each other, because we are both custodians of American democracy. There is hope if we think through how we conduct dialogue. And some of us will say, that's hopeless today, because everyone is so angry. Well, if you're not part of that. And you are the coming generation. You are the ones who will be politicians 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. And if you believe that this kind of dialogue is possible, of course it's possible. It's up to you. It happens every day in our world. We just have to get it up a few notches, so that this also characterizes the way in which we speak to each other. But in simple terms, we must try to sit at the same table. I like that term. We talked about it over breakfast this morning. If you look back to ancient philosophy, or if you look back to New Testament Israel or Palestine, you will see that this is a very key thing, gathering at the same table. This was something that was seen as a signal that we accept each other. Even if we're different, even if we're enemies, we will sit down at the same table. If you read Plato's Laws, which is an overview of what the best laws of the cities should be, there's a separate section on the common meal. And of course, maybe most famously in our culture with deep roots in the Jewish culture of that time is this image here. Jesus gathered with his disciples at a time of confusion, at a time of fear, at a time of betrayal and death. What do? We gather at the table. A wonderful line in the Gospel according to Luke, where he says, I have so much been looking forward to sharing this meal with you. In the midst of what is terrifying, we gather together at the table. I spoke with Semba's dear wife Hannah just before the lecture, and we reminded each other of how that was challenged during the pandemic. Remember the pandemic? Phew! That was something when we couldn't even sit down. I almost didn't dare be with myself even. We had these rules of how many people you could invite for Thanksgiving and stuff like that. That was scary. And it isn't quite the same as social distancing. I got this from one of my daughters. This is the Last Supper in pandemic times. Jesus and the disciples meet on Zoom, and the Lord starts with, all right, does everyone have sound? It's not quite the same. And it's a funny image, but it's of course a very real image. A starting point is actually finding the physical meeting spot. And you find out through the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, you find these stories again and again. Some of you will know the story of Zacchaeus. What does Jesus do? He goes home to him. I want to eat the meal with you. You can find similar sort of examples from from all the world's religions, creating that sort of arena. And there's something about food, isn't there, where you relax and you create the space. That's okay. It's okay to be together, even when we disagree. My friends, make sure you do that when you have your tailgate or tent parties. I'm beginning to learn about Ole Miss lore, how you do these things when it's football. You know, we Europeans don't really understand football. We talk about that, Graham. You know, we don't understand because you don't kick. Well, you kick once and you get a point, or 3 points, or 7 yards. What's going on here? We Europeans are too simple. We like soccer. Kick it in. That's all we do. But when you have this sort of gathering, meet in peace, enjoy each other, and don't necessarily ask each other what you voted. Share the fact that you did vote. For those of you who are Mississippians, remember to vote today. Great thing. But share. Yes, we have to be at the same table. Just have to show you that once more because I saw a really funny cartoon, which was this picture. And then the text next to it is the disciple coming to the restaurant on beforehand to reserve a table. And he says to the waiter, we need a table for 26. 26? Says the waiter, you're only 13 people. Yes, but we're all sitting on the same side of the table. That's interesting. Why did they do that? Maybe they did so in the Renaissance, who knows? My friends, we are living at a time of crisis. And let's look at what some of those crises consist in. In many countries, we see great polarization and much anger. There's nothing new about that. If anyone here has taken a course in US history about the 1830s and Andrew Jackson, you know, this has happened before and it was really fierce. We all scaringly know where that ended, in the US Civil War. Yeah, there's been great polarization at other times when it hasn't come across as so extreme. The 60s in America is a very good example because that was a real time of polarization. Look at the election between Johnson and Goldwater in 1964. Look at the Vietnam demonstrations. But at the time, there was still this sense of a center. So there was enough of gravity in the middle so that when we were to decide on the really big things, we would listen to Walter Cronkite on TV. You're too young to know about him, but he talked about this and everyone knew Walter Cronkite was correct. We have now landed on the moon. Yes, we have, sir. And so they came together in Congress. The great important bills on Social Security, civil rights, normally 70, 80, 90% would come together. You had a sense of a center. What we are seeing in many nations today is polarization accompanied by very much anger and distrust of the other. And then, scaringly, you have resurgence of armed conflict. I work at the Peace Research Institute, and my friends and statisticians were very optimistic until about the year 2014. People were saying things are going the right way. We have fewer wars, fewer people die in wars, we have less poverty. The world is going the right way. Something has happened in the meantime. I live in Europe, and we have a hot war right in the midst of our continent. And that war is not just a war of interests or territory. It's a war of ideals. It's a war started by Vladimir Putin in order to make sure that Western ideals of democracy and rule of law don't spread further. This is scary for someone like myself in a country like Norway with a border right on Russia, because we know that this could go much further if we don't stop it. And then we have what is happening now in Israel. We still have the crisis in Yemen and in Syria. We have had terrible armed conflict in Ethiopia. We have in Sudan. We see actually war seeming to come back as a solution. We can solve things by using armed force, and we must protest. I'm not a pacifist. I'm a former officer in the Norwegian army. I believe in the right to defend yourself, but I also believe that that is always the last resort. We are seeing threats to the rule of law. I won't go into detail, but we can find examples from this country too. The country that the rest of us look up to as the safest and strongest democracy in the world. And I can assure you, when we watched on January 6th, 2021, we were pretty scared. We see major environmental disruption in our world. We see the emission of climate gases that we don't have full control over, which could change the world utterly, also when it comes to demographics and migration. And we also see a loss of biodiversity, where we won't get those species back, because when they're gone, they're gone. The traditional view within our culture has been that human beings are stewards. We need to take care of this world. Are we? Alongside all of this, we are in many countries seeing rising poverty and injustice. And the feeling of injustice, the feeling of being on the outside, is often a precursor to armed conflict. Then we have development of technology at breakneck speed, with the danger of losing control. How many people in this room have asked questions in either Bing or ChatGPT or similar sorts of services? It's kind of fun, isn't it? I recently asked Bing who my wife is. I mean, I know her over 30 years, but I was asking, who is this person? Well, it got part of it right, where she works as a bureaucrat, things like that, and then it said she's the sister of Henrik Syse, the philosopher. That was interesting. I asked, what kind of education does she have? And in clear Norwegian prose, very good sentences, said, well, we don't quite know, we haven't found out, I haven't found out. Maybe social sciences, since she works in one of the ministries. But maybe she's interested in philosophy and existential questions. Maybe she has even inherited some of her brother's talents. But of course, if I didn't know better, I would go, oh, yay, this is cool. It sounds good. Maybe it's even a human being saying it. These are simple examples that I could mention to you, many that are more complex. At this very school, bless you, you are doing work on this. You're trying to understand both the technology and the use of these kinds of systems. But the fact that they are changing us at breakneck speed, because we don't really know where it's going. I spoke to a leading representative, vice president of one of Norway's leading weapons manufacturers, and she said that our goal is never to sell something that we don't understand. Which may sound like an obvious thing, but said it's not obvious anymore. Because of the programs that we are developing, some of the algorithms are so complex, we don't really understand what they're doing. And they're also learning along the way, what we call machine learning. So they may do things that we have never predicted. And if you think that this development stopped now, you're wrong. But of course, the optimistic side of this is this one, my friends. This is also a time of unprecedented opportunities and unrivaled possibilities also for the exact kind of dialogue I talked about. That's, of course, the great thing about everything from email to Zoom, is that we can meet in a way that we have never been able to do before. We can have a global consciousness that was unthinkable 400 or 500 years ago. Please, use that for good. Think of it as a great opportunity. Think of yourselves as people who are called to international service. What is your calling? What is your vocation? What should you think? And all the different things you're going to do. You have 150 different callings and vocations in this room, but nonetheless, let us talk about what we have in common. What should be your calling in this time of crisis? I think it is to be agents of respect and dialogue. You have a unique opportunity for doing that. You can become agents of positive change in your community and vis-a-vis your fellow human beings. You can bring, what is that? I'm sorry, I wrote that last night on my last slide. It's supposed to be human beings. Should I tell you something funny? If you look at the old Puritans and they did needlework, right? They would do a needlework of the alphabet and would always find a mistake somewhere. And you know why? It was to show that only God is perfect. So there's actually theology here in this one. Sorry about that. I'll correct that sentiment before I send it out to you if people want to see this out. Human brain? What is that? And maybe this as a follow-up question. How do you maintain hope together when there are so many telling you that there isn't hope? How do you together formulate those very concrete experiences of hope, of what we can do? And one thing I want to encourage you to do is to look back into history, because there are some really great examples. I've mentioned some of them, haven't I? So that we can make sure that on all issues that are important to the creation of war and conflict, we will work together. Maybe we said, is this possible? The people in France saying, how do we work with Germany? See what they did. Look at Hitler. Look at the World War. We should punish them. And in Germany, it was a lot of resentment. Now we need to rebuild ourselves and not work with the French. But these two great leaders and I would add both of them, spiritual leaders, believing honestly that this is what God wants for this world, created the Cold and Steel Union at the start of real peace in Western Europe. Here is another of my all-time favorites, Eleanor Roosevelt, a remarkable lady, who was asked after the Second World War to be the first head of the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations. And what was their task? Well, I've mentioned it already, to write the draft for a universal declaration of human rights. And if you go into the archives and look at the work that she did, with René Cassin, with P.C. Chang, with some of these other great scholars she had on board, in creating a unity between people of totally different religions and beliefs, centered around this key term, inherent dignity. Every human being has inherent dignity. All of these three, in my view, could have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize. I was not on the committee then, so I couldn't really make that difference. I was born in '66, so I came a bit too late. But I will show you someone who was a leading American scholar and diplomat, Ralph Bunche, himself of African-American origins. Almost unknown today, he got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1951. He was the first to make a stab at peace in the Middle East. And he managed to end the initial wars between Israel and the Arabs in the Middle East. And he was also a great visionary. He had done work on race politics around the world. He had been a teacher at several great university institutions, including Howard University and UCLA. And he was imbued with optimism. But Ralph Bunche had a problem, because he was told, when he was peace negotiator for the United Nations, that you cannot go too far in giving the Palestinians rights, because we haven't come that far yet. You have to hold back. And he said, how can I do my job if I essentially say to the one party that you won't get any of your demands? Well, he went as far as he could. There was peace. He did get the Nobel Peace Prize. But he knew there is more we must do for mutual understanding. This could be you. Each and every one of these human beings here were what I would call regular folk. Eleanor Roosevelt didn't even have higher education. But they all believed that what I stand for can make a difference in the world. They all believed in human dignity. They all fought for it. We need these sorts of ideas. I'll take you on a little detour now before I go towards the end. Are you doing okay? Good here. It's strange with lectures. The lecturer is using something like 80 different muscle groups just in the face. The listener is just listening. Guess who gets tired first? Strange thing. But I'll take you on a little detour that I think is instructive. And it's taken from a book I'm writing right now, which is, of all things, about the Apollo moon landings. It's a fascinating part of human history. The fact that we actually landed on the moon. We landed on the moon, folks! I mean, it's so long ago you almost forgot, but just the fact that they managed to do that. And one of the most interesting things that immediately everyone around the world started saying, we've done it. There are only 12 people who walked on the moon. I've actually met 2 of them. It's amazing there must be good air on the moon because they look really young still. I met Charlie Duke and Jack Smith last year. Amazing people. And there's a lot to learn from that because there was a common endeavor, and not least that common endeavor, which came from the Cold War. The space race will have to beat the Soviets, ended up in a unique peace process between the Soviet Union and the United States. Starting in 1971, let's now do it together. And that's what has ended up at the International Space Station today. It's a real tragedy that Vladimir Putin is dismantling that. It shows it's possible. The one I'll talk about, though, is a different one. Does anyone know what I'm showing a picture of here? This is the service module of Apollo 13. Maybe someone here has seen the film Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is great, but don't go on a trip with him because things will go wrong. You'll end up in a volcano or on a desert island or stranded in space. If you haven't seen Apollo 13, you should. Can I encourage you teachers to show it in class? It's a really, really good film. So what happened? They're on their way to the moon. It's the 3rd moon mission. Apollo 11 was the first to actually land. They traveled there with Apollo 10 and 8 as well. But but they didn't actually land, but they landed with Apollo 11 and 12, very successful. Doing the third one, people are starting to lose a bit of interest, but they say this is great, great scientific travel, halfway to the moon, bang! Explosion aboard. The so-called PRIO tanks. Turned out afterwards, technical glitch. Could have been found out before. Hadn't been. And they're stranded in space. No electricity and not enough oxygen in the command module where they're supposed to be. And everyone on Earth says this is probably doomed. We have 10% chance of getting them back. Spoiler alert, they got them back. How did they do it? Well, technically speaking, it was about using the little lunar module, which looked like a spider, which they landed on the moon, as a lifeboat. So all three of them crawled into this little machine meant for two people for a few days, and essentially used that to navigate back. And they did it. And they had to navigate exactly right. And it was freezing, and one of them got ill. They managed to do it. But I would like to go through some of those things that I think can be learned from this kind of experience. A, when there's a crisis, we need teamwork. There was unique teamwork. There were thousands of engineers and astronauts working together on finding out, but through coordination, that was amazing. People from all over the world said they wanted to help. One of the first telephones they got were from Moscow, asking, what can we do to help you? We will get the astronauts back. Proper coordination. The right hand must know what the left hand is doing. As George W. Bush once says, the right hand must do what the left. No, hard with right and left sometimes. You need coordination, right? You need to know who's doing this, who's doing that. Not least, they had a vision for what to achieve. Both the immediate vision, which was to get these astronauts back, but also the big vision. You've heard Kennedy's speeches, haven't you? We will land a man on the moon by the end of the decade and get him safely back, which is actually a crucial part of it. I realize that's a kind of sweaty moment when you sit on the moon and the engine doesn't start. You have jumper cables there? I actually asked one of the lunar module pilots, did you worry about that? And he said, no, we just assumed it would work. But of course, one of Nixon's greatest speeches was the one he never held. You can find it online. That's a speech he would have held if Apollo 11 hadn't got back. It's a remarkable speech. And it ends by saying that when we now look up at the moon, we will now know that some of us is always there. Some of humanity. Well, they did get back. But in this case, they didn't even get there. They had the vision to get them back, but also this vision of something we are to do together. Something that's a common endeavor. Of course, you needed unprecedented innovation too. They needed to find out how we can actually survive with these three people in this small lunar module. And I can assure you there was quite a lot of string and ducting. You know, just finding out how to do it. But alongside unprecedented innovation, thinking through things you've never thought through before, there was this very important point, habits and routines. And maybe the most important of them all is one I've already touched on, important in all dialogue. We speak well of and to each other. The whole atmosphere is suffused with meaning well and wishing well for each other. There is actually even a scene in Apollo 13, the film that they made, which diverts from that, because in order to make the film more fun, they have a quarrel on board. They quarrel with each other and say, why did you do that? If you listen to the tapes, it didn't happen. Because they always make sure that we speak well to each other. Even when we disagree. Even when someone comes up with an idea, we go, we can't do that. They maintain this sense of civility. Underlying this is a belief that individuals can make a difference. Always in companionship with others, always part of a community, but we also believe in individuals. I believe that is the best answer to the question, why did the Americans get to the moon first? The Russians were originally far ahead, but the Russians never trusted individual astronauts. So they had backup systems and computers everywhere. Whereas you Americans did the great thing of trusting the individual. If we calculate wrongly, Neil Armstrong will get us down. And they did. And then there were some crucial virtues, maybe these two foremost of all. Faith and hope. We can do it. My friends, we are faced with an uncertain future. I have a favorite illustration of what we should not do. It's taken from an album cover. I'm from the 1960s, so many of my greatest cultural images are from LPs. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, have you heard about that? I mean, it's not the same as Spotify or CDs. You know, the covers of albums. Woo! One of my favorites is from a group called Supertramp. It's from a record from 1975 called Crisis. What crisis? We're doing okay, aren't we? I can tailgate under my tent here and wait for the next football game, and who cares what happens out there? No. Our calling is to get up from that chair because we can make a difference. There are many challenges of uncertainty, not least that we don't quite know what it is that will be around the next quarter. We weren't prepared for Ukraine. We didn't know that the attack from Gaza would come. We weren't prepared for the pandemic. Well, in Scandinavia, we have a funny illustration of that. Because we have Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish. They all sound approximately like this. That's the way we talk. But then we have a neighboring country called Finland. Have you heard about Finland? They sit in saunas and say nothing. And they are the happiest people in the world. And the rest of us wonder, how can they be? They're so serious. But anyway, the Finns are great. But they have a totally different language. It's Finnish Ugric. We don't understand a thing of it. And I remember my uncle worked in northern Norway, and he would travel home through Finland, do the quick tour through Finland, and he would say he'd see his favorite traffic sign, the Finnish danger sign. That's a triangle, and underneath it says Ykköleikki. He does that. And you drive on, and you realize there is something I should be scared of, but I don't know what. I have no idea what it is. Beware of Ykköleikki. What's that? I even found a Finnish danger sign just for you.